Welcome everyone. Today I'll be covering the Yo-yo intermittent running test level 1. We'll be looking at a rugby props results. We're going to look at the test, the validity, reliability, and see what that means for us moving forward as part of his training battery. The Yo-yo test primary objective is to assess aerobic capacity by repeating high intensity bouts of running. The test also has been moderately proven to be a predictor of VO2 max. Now, based on analysis of 141 subjects by Bangsberg in 2008, there was a significant correlation between the yo-yo test and VO2 max, with a correlation factor of 0.7. It's also been an even more useful tool to compare to normative data of athletes of the same cohort and attain baseline aerobic capacity measures in a sport-specific test, which includes agility, speed, and also aerobic capacity. Now, the typical error for the yo-yo test is about 90 meters. So if we're going to monitor it, we're going to need to see a change in 90 meters for it to be of significant relevance to us. So in 2003, Krustrup et al. Looked at the reproducibility of the test as well and repeated the yo-yo test twice in a week in the same cohort, and they had very similar results. So the first time they conducted it, their results were a mean of 1,867, and the second time 1,880, and they looked at 13 players there. Now, moving on, Grekic et al. In 2019 revealed an intra-class correlation coefficient for the test-retest reliability, spanning from 0.78 to 0.98, which is quite good. Now, across test variations with participant familiarity and sports experience, the intra-class correlation remains consistently high at above 0.9, and coefficients of variation low, so less than 10%. So we can rely on the study. Now, concerning a rugby prop player, the findings from Posthumus et al. In 2020 indicated forwards exhibited shorter jump distances, slower 10-meter sprint times, slower 20-meter sprint times, and notably less yo-yo test distances compared to back studies. Now, also comparative VO2 max correlated substantially with yo-yo distance, moderately with 40-meter sprint time, and repeated sprint abilities. So therefore, the yo-yo test remains important in optimizing overall player performance and keeping an eye on it and their capabilities, not only with aerobic capacity, but also those other areas. Now, it's important to acknowledge the position of our prop. So he's going to have higher relative strength, and then those other physical attributes may change as we look at different positions. Now, the yo-yo intermittent running test commences is set up as displayed on the screen. The athletes commence at cone B, guided by audio cues. The participants sprint to cone C and return to cone B before the next beep signal. A 10-second recovery follows at cone B, where they jog between B and A and back to B before the next signal. Now, if they fail to reach the cone twice, then that's considered an elimination, and failures are limited to 2 consecutive tries. The test typically lasts 5 to 15 minutes, and what's required is a flat field of width equivalent to the player's width. So I'd say every player needs about a meter, so 13 players will need 30 meters wide and then 25 meters in length. We need to mark this by cones or witches' hats, and the beep signal will be played via stereo. Now, the pre-test athlete prep is important to standardize to ensure repeatability is maintained. It's important to consider nutrition and potentially promoting adequate hydration 24 hours prior to the test and avoiding caffeine and any kind of supplementation on the day. I think it's a bit extreme to really control calorie intake. I think it's unrealistic in a team environment. Allowing for recovery from other training sessions is also important. So 48 hours prior, no games, no other physiological tests or any new workouts. Effort needs to be considered, so making sure that the effort encouragement is kind of standardized. So maybe minimizing talking during the test would be something that's quite important, because you have someone who's motivating you, you're going to be performing much better than the time that you didn't have that. Setting achievable goals, maintaining focus, and adopting a positive mindset can allow for mental readiness, and familiarity with the actual yo-yo test is quite important for the overall test results, as spoken about on the first 2 slides there. Finally, making sure we have a standardized warm-up is adopted for every yo-yo test. That'll include lunges, high knees, butt kicks, side shuffles, hopping, and some dynamic stretches to prepare physically and mentally. Other test preparation measures and those that may calibrate the test include preparing result recording forms and ensuring all necessary equipment is available and functioning correctly, including that stereo, and making sure that the whole team can hear the stereo. We want to place cones securely without any hazards on the ground, and making sure each player has one cone so we can minimize any kind of error in determining whether they've reached the line or not. We want to verify measurements with 2 health professionals just to make sure we're 100% with our distances, and we're going to adjust the equipment to accommodate for the subjects. I think it's quite important to also note footwear. So, like someone running in football boots may have more speed or more grip compared to those who are in just general joggers. So, we want to make sure we're always in the same footwear. Now, the scores can be presented in 3 ways. So, we've got total distance, level achieved, or we can also calculate VO2 max via a formula. Now, to calculate the distance, I think it's the simplest method, and it's the one I prefer to use. We just need to count the amount of shuttles, and then we need to multiply that by 40. An example would be if an athlete performs 30 shuttles, this number can be multiplied by 40 and calculate their distance, which is 1,200 meters. Now, utilizing this assessment within a team environment can offer its advantages, and conducting it on a large scale can be done quite well. But you do want to kind of minimize too big of a scale, so maybe breaking up the team into forwards and backs could be realistic. If there is enough team personnel, like trainers, then doing it with the whole team at once can also be realistic. This test is a potential performance indicator, so the scores allows comparisons against benchmark data, teams' collective data, and previous teams within the same club, and also position categories. This allows us to determine whether players can sustain repeated high-intensity bouts, therefore facilitating interventions to enhance performance and overall team success, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. It would be ideal to schedule the yo-yo and other training battery tests at the commencement of pre-season, midway through the pre-season, and before the season begins. And then throughout the season, we may use it on a needs basis, just to see where the athlete's at compared to where we got to at the start of the season. There are some additional tests, like the ones displayed on the screen, the 30-15 test, the Cooper 12-minute test, and the B test. I think one of the negatives for these is that they're not as sport-specific as the yo-yo test. Running in one distance without any kind of agility work, that kind of can affect the score. I think the yo-yo test has a big positive over these 3, because the agility for the props in rugby union is quite necessary. They rarely run more than 5 meters at a time. So I think that component is the big win for the yo-yo test for these props. So if we're going to look at our guy in case study 1, he scored 920 meters on the yo-yo intermittent running test. Now, in relation to normative data, this study looked at 23 forwards in professional rugby union in 2020 by Posthumus et al. Now, the score 920 is 40% less than the average, and this score has a Z score of minus 2.04, indicating that he's significantly below par in his abilities to repeat high-intensity bouts of running compared to rugby union elite level forwards. It's important to keep in mind other forwards may have performed better than the props, so he may not be that bad, but it's important to note, like, we can compare to all the forwards and see he's quite below par. And then we can also assume that his sprint time, his agility also is compromised. Now, tracking the meters covered in the repeated bouts in the yo-yo test can be tracked at different times throughout the season. It will be stored on an Excel sheet with dates and graphs comparing normative data. I would also insert formulas to calculate approximate VO2 max. Percentages in relation to norms as well can be calculated, and it will allow us to clearly plan intervention and enhance physiological adaptations that we're looking for. It can also guide our training practices and cater for any potential pitfalls and physiological attributes, and allow us to also review the rate of improvement, plateaus, and long-term trends. Now, the ability to do this test and succeed requires speed, agility, and aerobic capacity. So therefore, training would focus on improving all these aspects and qualities contributing to the athlete's score in the yo-yo test. Now we're done during pre-season, and returning from off-season allows us to track physiological improvements, as I stated. And here's an example of a typical intervention that I believe that will improve their yo-yo score. So we'll start with a warm-up, high knees, butt kicks, lunges, and dynamic stretches. We'll do some sprints, aiming for speed, 30-meter shuttles, similar to the yo-yo test, with a little bit more meters in it. Then we can do some conditioning games, and then finish with skills and defense under fatigue, and also finishing with a cool down. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you got something out of it.